I often ponder what the outcome would have been if I had left a note. A simple piece of paper left on the kitchen counter detailing my reasons for walking away. Would she have trembled as she read it? Would tears have streamed down her face, realizing that I had witnessed it all? Or would she have crumpled the note, discarding my words just as she had discarded my trust? However, I chose not to leave a note. I left without a trace, without a word. It all began with a mysterious phone call from an unfamiliar number. Typically, I would have ignored it, as I always did. But that night, a strong instinct compelled me to answer. There was silence on the other end at first, followed by a deep exhale. "If I were you, I'd check your wife's messages. Have a good night, buddy." Click. The call ended abruptly before I could respond. As I stood there with the phone against my ear, heart pounding, my mind raced through various scenarios. Was it a wrong number? A prank? A scam? Yet a peculiar unease settled in my stomach, leaving me bewildered and anxious. I couldn't ignore what unfolded before me. Despite my attempts to convince myself it was insignificant, my hands were already in motion, unlocking Emily's laptop on the kitchen counter. Her password, our anniversary, seemed meaningless in that moment. As her inbox appeared, my world shattered. A single unread message lay there blatantly. "Last night was amazing, can't stop thinking about you." A surge of panic washed over me, my head spinning and ears ringing. My breaths were shallow and shaky as I rapidly scrolled through months of messages. Phrases like "wish I could see you again tonight," "but my husband is home," cut through me. Her husband, me, was described as an obstacle, a burden standing between her and someone else. My vision blurred and my mouth grew dry. The sound of my own pulse reverberated in my head, drowning out my ragged breathing. Upstairs, she hummed in the shower, unaware that her life was on the brink of irrevocable change. In that moment, a shift occurred within me. I had the urge to confront the situation by storming upstairs, hurling the laptop into the bathroom, and demanding answers. Another part of me considered a different approach. Waiting for her to come downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with the incriminating messages displayed, and letting her witness the moment our connection was severed. However, I soon realized that no explanation she could offer would soothe the pain. What excuse could she come up with? A mistake? Needing something different? Planning to confess eventually? I decided not to grant her the satisfaction of my tears or guilt, or to entertain any false apologies. Instead, I gathered only the essentials: my car keys, wallet, and passport, and embarked on a journey into the night without looking back. The darkness of the night enveloped me as I drove away, the headlights illuminating my path. But everything else seemed hazy, almost as if I was experiencing it from a distance, detached from my own physical presence. Despite the steady grip, I had no destination, no plan, just distance. The first hour, I drove in silence, letting the road pull me further away from the life I had just abandoned. Every time I thought about Emily, about those messages, I felt my grip tighten, my pulse hammering in my skull. The words were playing in my head like a song I couldn't turn off. "Wish I could see you again tonight, but my husband is home." Husband, a title that had become meaningless in an instant. I wanted to feel anger. I wanted to feel anything other than this hollow emptiness. But the truth was, I didn't even have the energy for rage. I just felt disconnected, like I had left something behind that I'd never get back. A green highway sign flashed by, 80 meters to the next city. I didn't recognize the name. I didn't care. I just kept going. Somewhere around midnight, I stopped at a gas station. The kind that looks the same no matter what state you're in. Flickering fluorescent lights, a dingy restroom, a cashier who barely looked up. I refilled my tank at the gas station using his phone, then went inside to purchase a bottle of water and a pack of gum. While standing at the register, I caught sight of my reflection in the security mirror above the counter. The man staring back at me looked unfamiliar. Disheveled hair, dark circles under my eyes, and a vacant expression. As the cashier handed me my change, he asked, "You all right, man?" I blinked, managing a nod. "Yeah, just tired." Though he seemed skeptical, he didn't press further. I returned to my car and sat there for a while, staring at my phone. I had switched it off before leaving, but now I hesitated. Was she searching for me? Had she even noticed my absence? Would it matter to her? With a deep breath, I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated. A few missed calls, one from Emily, two from an unknown number, but no texts. She had called once, then nothing. Perhaps she hadn't realized I was gone yet. Maybe she was still in the shower when I departed, blissfully unaware that something was amiss. Or perhaps, maybe she already knew. Perhaps she had seen the empty closet, the missing bag, and drawn her own conclusions. I entered the lobby after stretching my stiff muscles. The air was heavy with the scent of stale cigarettes and old carpet. Behind the front desk, a disinterested woman absently flipped through a magazine. She barely acknowledged me as I approached and inquired about a room. My voice was hoarse from hours of silence. Chewing her gum leisurely, she asked if it was just me, and if I preferred to pay with cash or card. Opting for cash, I had withdrawn all possible funds from my bank, leaving no digital trace for Emily or anyone else to follow. Silently, she handed me the key for room 14 and gestured down the hall. I took the key, nodded, and left without further conversation. Upon entering the room, I found it to be exactly as I had anticipated, with peeling wallpaper, a rigid bed, and an outdated TV that emitted a faint buzz when turned on. It didn't matter though, it wasn't home. In truth, I no longer had a place to call my own. Tossing my bag onto a chair, I settled on the edge of the bed and stared blankly at the wall. The weight of my actions was beginning to press down on me. The realization that I had left, that there was no turning back, and that Emily was likely still asleep in our shared bed. All of it hit me at once. Reluctantly, I reached for my phone, ignoring the warning in the back of my mind. The screen illuminated with a single missed call from Emily, devoid of any accompanying messages or explanations. Despite the obvious lack of concern on her end, I found myself fixated on the screen, as if willing her to show some remorse. Disappointed, I tossed the phone aside and let out a deep sigh, trying to make sense of the situation. But sleep eluded me, my mind consumed by the recent events. The unanswered messages, the mysterious call, and the surreal feeling of being a mere spectator in my own life. Instead of the expected anger, I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was a ghost drifting through a reality that no longer seemed to recognize me. My past home and identity now felt like distant memories, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. No one would remember. I woke up to the sound of tires rolling over gravel. For a split second, my brain thought I was back home, lying in my bed, waking up next to Emily like I had 1,000 times before. The hazy fog of sleep made me believe I hear the soft rustling of sheets, feel the warmth of her body next to mine, maybe even hear her mumbling something about needing coffee before she could function. But then reality set in. I wasn't home. I wasn't even sure where home was anymore. I blinked up at the ceiling, the ugly yellow light casting long jagged shadows from the cracked blinds. The air smelled like old carpet and cheap cleaning products. The motel room was still the same as last night, stale and impersonal, a place built for people like me who didn't want to be found. Rolling onto my side, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. The battery was almost dead. I debated turning it back on, but the last time I had checked there had been nothing. I received just one missed call from her. That was the extent of our communication. I threw my phone onto the bed and sat up, running a hand over my face. My body felt sluggish, as if it hadn't fully adjusted to my new reality. Craving coffee, I grabbed my wallet and headed outside. The morning air was brisk and cool, with an overcast sky overhead. The parking lot was mostly deserted except for a few trucks near the entrance. Everything seemed hazy and distant, like I was walking through a dream. Across the road there was a diner that looked like it hadn't changed since the 80s. A neon sign reading Maggie's Diner flickered in red letters. The scent of bacon and fresh coffee wafted through the open door. Inside the diner was almost empty. A man wearing a baseball cap sat at the counter, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. A waitress hummed along to a country song playing on the jukebox as she wiped down a table. I chose a corner seat with my back against the wall, giving me a clear view of the entire room. Some habits are hard to break. A woman in her 50s approached with a notepad in hand on a quiet morning. "Han, what can I get you?" "Coffee, black." My voice sounded hoarse and worn. She nodded and suggested I could use something to eat as well. Despite not being hungry, I agreed. "Whatever's good," I replied. With a knowing look, she disappeared into the kitchen. As I leaned back against the booth, gazing out the window, the endless highway stretched into the distance, leading to unknown destinations. I pondered where I might find myself in the coming days, months, or years. Would I still be on the road, evading the shadows of my past, Or would I discover a place to settle down in an obscure town where my name was unfamiliar? Lost in thought, I barely registered the waitress placing the strong bitter coffee in front of me. The taste grounded me, allowing my mind to drift back to thoughts of Emily, the first time I had let myself dwell on her since my departure. I wondered what she was doing at that moment. Had she awoken to find me missing, reaching out for me in bed only to find emptiness? Did she even care? I closed. I rubbed my tired eyes, letting out a slow exhale. It was clear that the answer to that question was a resounding no. If she had truly cared, she would have made an effort to reach out. A call, a text, any sign of concern would have sufficed. But all I had received was silence. As the waitress placed a plate of scrambled eggs, toast, and bacon in front of me, I mindlessly picked at my food, my appetite nowhere to be found. The door chimed as a man in his mid-40s, clad in a brown jacket and sporting weary eyes, entered and took a seat at the counter. There was something about him that struck a chord within me. Not his appearance, but the heaviness in his every movement, the wariness etched in his slouched posture. He seemed like a man on the run, perhaps escaping from himself or a shattered past, much like mine. Lost in thought, I gazed into my coffee as wisps of steam rose into the air. It occurred to me for the first time how many people in that quaint diner might be mere shadows of their former selves. How many had left behind lives they could no longer bear, and how many like myself had vanished without a word of farewell. With a sigh, I massaged my temples, feeling a pang of shared solitude with those unnamed souls around me. To move past these thoughts, I knew I had to keep moving forward rather than dwelling on the past. Spending hours in that diner, I found myself fixated on my coffee, tuning into the conversations around me and observing the ebb and flow of people like the tide. Despite the plate of eggs and bacon in front of me, my mind was preoccupied with unwelcome thoughts, particularly those of Emily's betrayal. Instead of the expected anger, I felt a profound emptiness, as if I had been hollowed out from within, leaving only a shell of my former self. It wasn't until the waitress returned for a third coffee refill that I realized I had overstayed my welcome. With only a gentle smile, she silently acknowledged the untouched plate before moving on. Leaving some money on the table, I rose from my seat, stretched my legs, and set off on my way to the restroom inside. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, casting a dull, almost sickly glow over the cracked tiles and rust-stained sink. I stepped up to the mirror and stared at the man looking back at me. I didn't recognize him. Dark circles under his eyes, hollow cheeks, the stubble on his jaw uneven and rough, as if he had stopped caring about keeping himself presentable. His shirt was wrinkled, his collar stretched, his hair a mess. He looked like someone who had been lost for years, not just a few days. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, hoping it would snap me out of whatever state I was in, but the feeling didn't go away. That sinking, unbearable feeling that I wasn't just lost, I had nothing to return to. I grabbed a paper towel and dried my hands, avoiding my reflection this time. What was the point in looking? I didn't want to see the version of myself that Emily had turned me into. As I stepped out of the restroom, my eyes immediately went to the man sitting at the sea. Encountering the man in the brown jacket who had arrived earlier, I noticed that he wasn't eating. His fingers rhythmically tapped against his coffee mug, his gaze distant, lost in his own thoughts. I debated whether to just let him be just another passing stranger. Yet there was something in his demeanor, a sense of burden that mirrored my own, which compelled me to pause. Taking the seat on the stool beside him, I reached out. Initially, he didn't meet my gaze, continuing to tap his fingers against the mug as though playing an invisible piano. Eventually, he turned towards me. "Rough night?" I inquired, my voice rough from disuse. He emitted a dry chuckle, shaking his head, "More like a rough life." I nodded in silent solidarity, grasping more than I wished to admit. "Been on the road long?" he queried, now looking directly at me. His eyes held a mix of sharpness and wariness, the look of one who had faced too much yet somehow endured. "A few days," I confessed, uncertain of my destination. He smirked, stirring his drink as a comfortable silence settled between us. The two of us found solace in the coffee as we sat in silence at a roadside diner, avoiding the truths we were running from. Our unspoken agreement not to pry into each other's pasts seemed to serve a purpose: to provide comfort in our shared sense of aimlessness. After he finished his drink and left, I lingered a few moments longer before reluctantly deciding to follow suit. The open road beckoned, offering a temporary escape from the weight of memories I wasn't ready to confront yet. The endless stretch of faded asphalt ahead mirrored the uncertainty of my thoughts as I continued driving into the unknown. I gripped the steering wheel, my mind an endless reel of memories I didn't want to replay. The air inside the car was stale and heavy. I had rolled down the window in an attempt to clear my head, but it didn't help. I told myself I wasn't running. I was just going. But going where? That was the real question. The gas tank was running low, forcing me to stop at another nameless town that looked exactly like the last one. One main street, a few scattered houses, and a gas station that had probably been there since the 70s. I pulled into the lot, stepping out of the car, stretching my legs before making my way inside. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, and an older man behind the counter gave me a slow, assessing glance before going back to whatever was playing on the small, dusty TV in the corner. Some local news channel, something about a missing person. I tried not to let my mind go there. I grabbed a bottle of water and a protein bar. The kind of meal you eat when you don't care about food, just survival. Stepping out of the bathroom, I craved fresh air. The rain had subsided, yet the wind still wailed through the trees, causing the aging motel sign to creak. Clutching my jacket closer, I ventured out aimlessly. The confines of my room felt constricting, urging me to escape. The town lay quiet, its deserted streets bathed in the faint light of a few street lamps. Businesses along the main road remained shut, their signs flickering in the breeze. A gas station, a diner, a bar exuding a faint buzz from its neon lights. Lost in my own thoughts, I walked with no destination in mind. Eventually, I paused in front of a storefront, catching a glimpse of my reflection in the glass. The face that stared back at me was unfamiliar. Gone was the man who had left his old life behind. That man had a routine, a purpose, even if it was a facade. The figure in the mirror lacked that same certainty, lost in a sea of uncertainty. I disappeared into the quiet streets of a town where my name had never been known, becoming someone else entirely. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, until a whole year had slipped by since I walked out that door, without a word, erasing myself from the life I had built. Initially, I contemplated returning, not to Emily or my old life, but for closure, to anchor myself and avoid feeling like a ghost roaming the outskirts of reality. However, the more I remained absent, the more apparent it became that there was nothing left for me to go back to. Drifting through towns like a shadow, I avoided lingering in any one place for too long. I took up various odd jobs, bartending, gas station work, even construction for a brief period, to keep my mind occupied and prevent excessive introspection. Then one night she found me in a small town on my journey, just another stop along the way. Another temporary home I had no real attachment to. I was working in a quiet bar, wiping down glasses behind a counter, when I heard the door chime. I glanced up, ready to greet the customer, and there she was, Emily. Her hair was different, shorter. Her face was thinner, her eyes hollowed in a way I had never seen before, but it was her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She took a slow step forward, her hands trembling at her sides. She swallowed hard. I've been looking for you. I exhaled through my nose, setting the glass down carefully. Didn't look very hard. She flinched, and for a brief second, I saw something I hadn't expected. Regret. Real raw regret. I messed up, she whispered. I know that. I exhaled, sharply gripping the back of the nearest chair. I've spent the last year thinking about what I did, about how I ruined everything, and God, I don't know what I thought I'd find when I finally saw you again. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms, and she swallowed. I thought maybe you'd still. I hesitated to respond, allowing a heavy silence to linger between us. Did I truly care? Perhaps in a different time and version of myself I would have. Had she reached out sooner, fought for me, as I once would have fought for her, things might have unfolded differently. But that part of me had vanished. I exhaled deeply, running a hand across my jaw. For a while I waited for your call, for an explanation, an apology, or any gesture, but it never came. You chose to let go. And now, after a whole year, you suddenly reappear. What do you expect? For me to simply forget everything? Tears welled up in her eyes. I don't expect anything, she muttered. I needed to see you. I observed her, noticing her trembling shoulders in self-embrace, as if trying to hold herself intact. Once upon a time, I would have embraced her, pulled her close, and reassured her. I was once able to fix this situation, but not anymore. As I nodded slowly, her face crumbled upon seeing me. She let out a shaky breath and nodded, the realization sinking in that I had changed and was no longer the man she had betrayed. Despite the passage of time, some things couldn't be undone. She took a step back, wiping her eyes, and whispered an apology, nodding once more. I echoed her sentiment, and with that, she turned and exited the bar, fading into the night, just as I had done a year prior. Watching the door long after she left, I finally let out a breath and turned away, realizing that the past was no longer mine to hold on to, and neither was she.